Forget everything you've been told about great conquerors, noble knights, and epic battles. Today, we will plunge into an abyss of human nature where even the most hardened cynics will feel a chill. Francisco Pizarro. A name that should be etched not on a monument of glory, but on the tablets of human avarice, treachery, and an unprecedented, almost surreal audacity. Imagine an illiterate swineherd, cast by fate into the backwaters of Spanish poverty, not only managed to surpass, he trampled, humiliated, and obliterated a civilization whose empire stretched for thousands of miles, numbered millions of subjects, and held gold capable of blinding gods. And he did this not with the might of thousands of armies, nor with the genius of a strategist. No. He pulled off something that seems impossible, even in a conspiracy theorist's wildest dreams. While Cortés, with all his military genius and diplomatic hypocrisy, nearly broke his neck in a bloody dance with the Aztecs, Pizarro, with a handful of ragtag men numbering barely a few hundred, not only won, he stole an empire. He ripped the heart out of a living, pulsating organism, leaving behind only a bloody puddle and the dazzling gleam of gold that still fuels the myths of El Dorado. This was not a conquest in the usual sense. It was a surgical operation without anesthesia, performed by a butcher with extreme precision and cold blood. His weapon was not steel, but paranoia. Not gunpowder, but fear. Not tactics, but a deep, cynical understanding of human weaknesses. He saw cracks where others saw a monolith. He sensed the pulse of fear where others expected resistance. His genius, if it can be called genius, lay in his ability to manipulate, incite, deceive, and at the right moment, deliver a blow from which there was no recovery. Pizarro did not conquer. He decomposed. From within. And this capacity for absolute, unprincipled destruction makes him a figure far more sinister and compelling than any hero with a ceremonial portrait. He didn't just walk over corpses. He built his empire from the bones of vanquished enemies and shattered hopes. But how? How could such an inconspicuous, unremarkable man, born in dirt and oblivion, acquire such monstrous power? What precisely forged this ruthless will, this icy calculation, this ability to see others only as steps to his own greatness? The answers, as always, lie not in dusty chronicles, but in the dark corners of the soul, in those very moments that forge monsters or geniuses, or both, simultaneously. We have already spoken of Francisco Pizarro as the embodiment of absolute, surgically precise greed, capable of decomposing an empire from within, turning gold into blood, and civilization into dust. But to understand how a man becomes such an instrument of destruction, how an illiterate swineherd from a remote Spanish province gains the will for such total annihilation, one must look into the darkest, dirtiest corners of his soul, into those years when there was no gold, no Inca blood, but only the stench of a pigsty and endless humiliation. Imagine Trujillo, Extremadura, late 15th century, not the noble castles of Castile, nor the flourishing gardens of Andalusia, but a harsh, dusty, impoverished land, giving birth to people with skin tanned by the sun and souls hardened by necessity. Here, in this cradle of future conquistadors, who like birds of prey flocked to the scent of the New World, Francisco was born. Illegitimate. The bastard son of Captain Gonzalo Pizarro, who would later acknowledge his legitimate heirs, but not this boy, born of a peasant woman. What love could there be in such a birth? What betrayal could be more painful than existence itself, marked by the brand of a bastard? His mother, Francisca Gonzalez, abandoned him, giving him to her father, his grandfather, to raise. Think about it. Unwanted, abandoned, handed over, deprived even of maternal warmth, let alone paternal recognition. His childhood was not filled with tales of chivalric deeds, Latin lessons, or even basic literacy. It was dirt, cold, hunger, and endless piercing shame. He grew up among pigs. His hands were in manure. His clothes were rags. Swineherd was not just an occupation. It was a brand, a sentence, a perpetual reminder of his low birth, that he was a nobody. In a society where honor and origin defined everything, Francisco Pizarro was not just at the bottom. He was beneath it. Every word, every glance, every sneer from the noble children he saw from afar only hammered nails of humiliation into him. There was no room in his soul for tenderness, for compassion. He was shaped not by books, but by hunger, not by etiquette lessons, but by the blows of fate, not by kind words, but by contemptuous silence. This constant pain, this burning injustice, this awareness of his insignificance, all of it, like acid, corroded his soul, but at the same time it hardened it. At some point, perhaps one more time, as he, hungry and dirty, looked at the world that had rejected him, something inside him broke and reforged. It was not just leaving home, not just escaping poverty. It was a decision, a deep, cynical, irreversible decision, never again to be humiliated, never again to be nobody. He understood that the world, which had given him nothing by right of birth, would be forced to give him everything by force. If there was no honor to be received, it could be taken. If there was no wealth, it could be torn out with flesh. This was the switch, that point of no return, when a human soul, tormented and embittered, takes on a new, predatory form. Extremadura, this land where even the stones seemed hard and merciless, cultivated in him not only resilience but also an absolute pragmatism bordering on indifference to the suffering of others. Here they valued not morality, but results, not nobility, but cunning. And Pizarro learned this lesson thoroughly. He learned to survive, to deceive, to manipulate. He saw the weak devoured by the strong, and he decided to become the strongest predator in his pack. His illiteracy, his coarseness, all this was merely an outer shell for an incredibly sharp mind, capable of calculating moves, seeing weaknesses, and ruthlessly exploiting them. For him, gold became not just a metal, but a symbol of power, a way to take revenge on the world for every tear, every blow, every humiliation. It was not just greed, it was a thirst for recognition, a thirst for vengeance, a thirst to prove that even a swineherd could become a king, or one who overthrows kings. It was with this baggage, with this deep, unhealed wound, and an inhuman will to self-assertion, that he would set out to meet the ocean, to meet the unknown, to meet empires that did not yet know they were about to encounter a man who saw not people, but only resources, not civilizations, but only prey. His path to the greatest robbery in history was paved not with gold, but with pain, and it was this pain that would become the driving force of his most daring and most ruthless schemes. Francisco Pizarro was undoubtedly the architect of his own monstrous destiny, but did he act in a vacuum? Was this self-taught swineherd, who became an empire's butcher, merely a lone wolf tearing at a continent's flesh? No. Behind him stood not just the Spanish crown, granting him titles and permission. Behind him stood an entire system, an insatiable, multi-headed octopus, whose tentacles stretched from the stuffy offices of Seville, from the luxurious palaces of Madrid, from the dusty taverns, where bloody deals were struck. This was avarice elevated to dogma, consecrated by the cross and royal decree. Investors craving gold, prelates craving souls and lands, aristocrats craving power. All were secret patrons, unseen allies, beneficiaries of this grandiose, deadly scheme. They didn't just turn a blind eye to his atrocities. They demanded them, pushed for them, financed them. And of course there were his brothers, Gonzalo, Juan, Hernando, and even the illegitimate Francisco Martín de Alcántara, not just blood ties but an iron fist, forged from the same Extremaduran poverty as Pizarro himself. They were his extension, his shadow, his ruthless guard in a world where betrayal lurked behind every stone. These Pizarros were not just comrades, they were accomplices, each with their share of cynicism and lust for gain, each ready to lop off a head if it brought even a speck of gold or a sliver of power. They did not question his methods, they sharpened them, multiplying. Cruelty, turning every victory into another step on a ladder of bones. But every grand crime has its antagonists, its shadows, attempting to halt the relentless march of destruction. The first, and most tragic, was Atahualpa himself, the son of the Incas. This ruler, fresh from victory in a fratricidal civil war, was the embodiment of an entire civilization, as majestic as it was naive in its understanding of European greed. He saw Pizarro merely as another barbarian, incapable of comprehending the complex dance of diplomacy and exchange. He could not grasp that before him was not a warrior, but a predator, capable of turning hospitality into a trap and trust into a death sentence. Atahualpa, with his regal dignity and faith in the immutability of his world, became the ideal victim for Pizarro, who masterfully used his pride and ignorance for complete annihilation. This was not a battle, but a vivisection of a living organism, conducted under the guise of lies and religious hypocrisy. However, the true drama, that which tore at the very fabric of the conquest, unfolded not between the Spanish and the Incas, but among the conquistadors themselves. Here, Diego de Almagro enters the stage. A one-eyed veteran, Pizarro's longtime partner, his co-author in this bloody adventure. Almagro, a more straightforward man, but no less greedy, felt cheated, sidelined, deprived of his deserved share in the colossal spoils. Pizarro, with his cunning and skill in weaving intrigues, constantly kept him out of the game, appropriating the lion's share of wealth and land. This resentment, this poisonous envy, accumulating over years, transformed their once solid alliance into a deadly feud. This was not merely rivalry. It was a civil war that erupted among the victors, where yesterday's brothers in arms slaughtered each other with the same ruthlessness as the indigenous population. Almagro became the living embodiment of the curse that the gold itself carried, corroding even the strongest allies from within. And finally, there was Manco Inca Yupanqui. Initially a puppet, placed on the throne by Pizarro to lend legitimacy to his takeover, Manco proved to be not merely a spineless symbol. He observed, he learned, he absorbed all the pain and humiliation of his people. He saw his culture destroyed, sacred sites desecrated, and his people enslaved. His transformation from a submissive figurehead into a furious, irreconcilable leader of rebellion was the last, desperate cry of a dying civilization. Manco Inca did not simply lead an army. He was the voice of despair, a symbol of an unconquered soul. He forced Pizarro to fight on multiple fronts, to confront not only the remnants of a shattered empire, but also the seething rage of an entire continent. This was a struggle for survival, where every step Pizarro took forward was met with a new blow from the shadows, a new turn of betrayal or resistance. Pizarro's fate, like the fate of the empire he stole, was an intricate web of these forces, these conflicts, these unseen threads that pulled him towards an inevitable end. He stood at the pinnacle. The Inca Empire was broken. Its gold flowed like a river into Spanish coffers, and his main rival, Diego de Almagro, lay in a cold grave, executed on Francisco Pizarro's orders. It seemed the swineherd from Trujillo had finally reached his apotheosis, enjoying the fruits of a ruthless triumph. He was the absolute ruler of the New World. His word was law, his will a sentence. But in a world built on blood and betrayal, victory itself carries the seeds of demise. The irony of fate, or perhaps a natural consequence, was that the man who spent his life constructing cynical schemes, exploiting others' weaknesses and fears, became a victim of the very same game. He was too confident, too arrogant, too blinded by the gleam of his bloody gold to notice the shadows gathering around him. However, the echo of the Civil War had not faded. In the shadows of Lima, the new heart of this stolen land, names were whispered. The name of Almagro the Younger, Diego el Mozo, sounded like an oath, a call for vengeance. Those who remained without a share, humiliated, those who survived the bloody massacre among the conquistadors, gathered in secret circles. They were not merely avengers, they were shards of a broken mirror, reflecting the most repulsive traits of that era. Exiled, hungry, devoid of hope, they carried the poison of hatred that Pizarro himself had sown when he betrayed Almagro, when he deprived him of his share, when he took his life. Their hatred for Pizarro, this embodiment of avarice and treachery, was palpable, almost contagious. June 26, 1541, was an ordinary, sweltering day in Lima. Pizarro, aging but still powerful, was dining in his palace. He was always on guard, but apparently, years of absolute power and impunity had dulled his instincts, or perhaps he was simply tired of perpetual vigilance. Suddenly the silence was broken by a wild cry. A dozen or so conspirators, led by Juan de Rada, burst into the palace, cutting their way through the sparse guard. Cries of "Death to the tyrant!" and "Long live the king!" mingled with the clang of steel. The conspirators, like starving wolves, fell upon their victim. It was not a fight, but a slaughter. The old conquistador, accustomed to brutality, seized his sword, his old, faithful companion in countless atrocities, and plunged into the fray. Blood spurted as he received the first wound. He fought with the fury of a cornered beast. His eyes, accustomed to seeing fear in the eyes of others, now burned with despair and rage. His body, hardened in hundreds of battles, still retained the memory of wild strength. He was one against a dozen. Every movement was steeped in desperation, every parry a last attempt to hold on to power that was about to slip from his bloodied hands. But there were too many. Blows rained down from all sides. 1, 2, 3. He fell, pierced by blades, his opulent clothes soaked in his own blood. In that moment, as life left him, could he see before him the faces of those he had destroyed? The naive Atahualpa, the proud Manco Inca, the betrayed Almagro? Or was his consciousness consumed only by animal fear and a last, futile desire to atone for his sins? His finger, trembling, traced the sign of the cross on the floor, and the last word he exhaled was, Jesus. The symbol of the faith he had so often trampled became his final refuge. The swineherd from Extremadura, who became the self-proclaimed ruler of an empire, died like a hunted animal, in a pool of his own blood, forgotten. By all except those who came for his head. No triumphant march, no honors, just blood on the floor of his own palace. His fall is not merely a final chord in the life of one tyrant. It is an eternal reminder of how greed, betrayal, and a boundless lust for power create a vicious cycle that sooner or later consumes its creators. And if one looks closely, the echoes of this story, its mechanisms, and its lessons can be found even where they are least expected. Francisco Pizarro, the swineherd who became an empire's executioner, is not just a dusty figure from history books. His shadow stretches across centuries, frighteningly recognizable in our own time. He has not disappeared. He has mutated, adapted, continuing his work in new guises. Look at modern financial sharks devouring companies, politicians promising paradise but delivering poverty, charismatic cult leaders draining not only savings, but also will from souls. Are they not Pizarro's direct descendants? The same icy calculation, predatory instinct, the ability to see people merely as resources. Pizarro conquered not by force of arms, but by superior cynicism. He masterfully exploited Atahualpa's naive trust, the empire's divisions, and the bottomless greed of his own men, and played on all these strings. He made promises he had no intention of keeping, used religion as a shield for plunder, and justified barbarism as a civilizing mission. Sound familiar? Modern influencers selling dreams, tech giants monopolizing data, financial gurus pushing schemes. The tools have changed, from steel and gunpowder to algorithms and propaganda, but the basic mechanism of exploitation remains chillingly unchanged. What does this say about us? About human nature? Pizarro's story is not just a tale of a villain, it is a mirror reflecting our collective vulnerabilities. We are drawn to power, blind to its corrupting influence. We crave easy paths, falling into the trap of those who promise them. We judge the past, yet struggle to recognize its echo in the present. The Inca Empire fell not only because of the Spanish, but also because its foundations were undermined by internal discord, an inability to comprehend a monstrous form of greed. And are we, in our hyper-capitalist world, not subject to the same internal rot, the same exploitation by those who have mastered the art of manipulation and betrayal? His last moments, clinging to the cross, offer only a fleeting glimpse into the internal paradox of such a man. But Pizarro's true legacy is not in his death or in the gold. It is in the indelible stain he left on the concept of conquest, and in the chilling template for future generations seeking to subjugate the world to their will, regardless of the price in blood or soul. This forces us to ask, what price are we willing to pay for our own empires, be they personal, corporate, or national? The answer, often, is far more horrifying than we